Here we go. So next one is breathing. And so I'm actually going to read another excerpt from DBT. Again, I definitely encourage you guys, if you aren't familiar with DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, definitely embrace it. There's so many amazing tools in here that can be helpful for those who are working with people who are grieving, anyone who needs support with emotional regulation, group work, very good resource. And so there's a concept called moments to pause. And so what it says, moments of pause is like an Olympic swimmer who must take moments to pause and breathe in order to continue the race. No swimmer, Olympic or not, can continue swimming without periodic pauses to breathe. So too, all mindful people need to take periodic pauses to check in on their inner states of mind and emotion. Slow down for a moment and consider how to be more effective. Just like a swimmer, the key to pausing is actually breathing. Taking a series of deep, full breaths through their nose allows a feeling of momentary stillness to arrive, and then pausing to check in. This can be done in just 1 to 2 seconds, or can be more controlled and counted breathing. And so there are several benefits. I'm only just reading one of the benefits. It lists many benefits, but one of the key ones is this energy gives us oxygen. We need to make the best choices in the moment, whether that be to say something or to not say something, to do something or not to do something for the moment, and wait and see. And so again, that's from DBT. And so that's what we're going to talk about right now is breathing. It's definitely very beneficial, especially when those intense emotions, when someone's in acute grief, those intense emotions are popping up. It can be very helpful. And so there's different types of breathing. There's belly breathing, body breathing, and color breathing. And so the one we're going to talk about today is color breathing. There's also Ujjayi breathing, which for those of you who might be yoga oriented, you've probably heard of Ujjayi breathing. But basically, actually, let's do that together. So just for a moment, I want you to say the word ah. Just go ah, and then breathe in ah, and then blow out ah. And then this time, close your mouth and still have that restriction in your voice, that restriction in your tube with the breathing, and then blowing out through your nose. That same restriction in your voice. And you'll hear that noise. And that noise can be very soothing for some people. Some people say it sounds like being in a mother's womb, which is very soothing. Kind of going back to children who are crying. If you do running water, many times they'll pause for a second and just listen to the running water and just watch it because it reminds them of being in their mother's womb. And so I definitely encourage you guys to do Ujjayi breathing and teaching that to your clients as well, Ujjayi breathing. But again, that sound can be very soothing for a lot of people. And some people find it scary. It's different for everyone. So it's again, finding the right match for your clients as well. So yes, we're going to talk about color breathing. And so this here is an example of one that I did with a client. I changed some things in it, but it's one that I did with a client. And so basically what we do is you have our client identify their emotions. And we can do this in groups, or we can do this individually as well. And so basically we have our clients identify their emotion, whatever they're feeling. And we have them identify what is it they want to feel. So in this case, this person felt anxious, sad, and overwhelmed. And they wanted to feel calm, peace, and confidence. And so now we have them identify colors. And so the colors didn't quite come out the way they actually were when I scanned it. But anxiety is yellow, sadness is blue, overwhelmed is red, calm is orange, peace is green, and confidence is purple. So in the first picture, the middle one, we can see that there's a lot of anxiety in the head, the neck, and the chest, and the stomach area. And there's a lot of sadness in the arms. And we see that there's a lot of overwhelmed in the face and in the legs. And so what we did is I had them close their eyes. We did that muscle relaxation that we did earlier. And then I had them breathe in the colors that they wanted. So I had them breathe in calmness in orange and blow out anxiety in yellow. Breathe in calmness in orange, blow out anxiety in yellow. Just have them do that over and over. And then go to the next one. Breathe in green and peace and blow out the blue for sadness. Breathe in green for peace and blue for sadness. And then go to the next one, confidence and overwhelmed. And so as you see here on the last picture, we see that it looks a lot different than the first one. So earlier, the anxiety was in multiple places. Now the anxiety is only in the bottom part of their head, and that's it. The sadness, looking at the first picture, it was in their arms and hands. Now it's only in their hands. Looking at their feelings of overwhelmed, it was in their face, their legs, their feet. Now it's only in their feet. And we see that there's a lot of calmness in their arms and their stomach area as well. We see there's a lot of peace in their legs. And we see that there's a lot of confidence in their head as well. And so that again is just an example of color breathing. You can do this one with children. You can do this one with adults as well. Quite a few of my adults enjoy this one, but definitely children. This is a great one for those of you who might work with children. All right. And so the next one we're going to talk about is the art of now. And this is the 6 steps of living in the moment. And just go ahead and dive in. So the first one is, you'll hear some of these kind of repeated, but it's also helpful to be aware of as well. And so the first one is focusing less on what's going on in our mind and more about what's going on in the room. So this part, we might do some other grounding techniques. So looking around the room, finding 3 things that are calming, finding 3 shapes in the room, finding 3 or 5 things that are red. So there's different variations to this one as well. Sometimes it's more about just being in the present moment. Who's in the room with you? Is it your family? Is it friends? Who's in the space with you? Maybe you're alone and you're out in your garden and you're seeing the flowers. You're hearing the trees, the wind blow through the trees. You hear the rustle of the leaves. And so sometimes it's about not necessarily looking around the room, but actually being in the presence of whatever is happening in that space at the moment. The next one is relish or savor what is going on in the present moment. It's kind of the same thing. The next one is engaging in mindful deep breathing, which we just talked a little bit about. The next one is lose track of time by becoming engrossed in a task. That can be very helpful, helping our clients find a hobby. That can be very helpful in getting engrossed in a task. And then the next one is acceptance, that some things are beyond our control. I'm kind of going back to the serenity prayer that resonates with a lot of people, accepting that some things are truly out of our control. And then the last one is try to notice new things in an everyday situation. So it could be simply driving down the road and noticing a new billboard, or maybe talking to a friend and taking note of maybe their accent. You never noticed their accent before. So truly being in the present moment, the here and the now. Great. And the next one is guilt. And so when it comes to guilt, guilt work can be very challenging because there's a lot of irrational thoughts. Sometimes there's rational thoughts. Sometimes there's valid points. Sometimes some of the things that they share are irrational fears as well. And so there's actually another book I'm going to share with you guys, Taming the Anxious Mind. This is a book by Dr. Heidi Pan. Again, it's Taming the Anxious Mind. And in here, she talks about this concept of guilt. And she says the feeling of guilt comes up when we think we have gone against an internal value. If you feel guilty a lot, it probably means you care about being the best version of yourself. However, some of us habitually feel guilty. It's a habit of self-doubt. Therefore, it's important to differentiate habit guilt from helpful guilt. Helpful guilt directs these feelings towards healthy self-improvement. And so she gives some questions that we can reflect on. And so one of them is, did we really do something wrong here? And so kind of thinking about a lot of the women that I work with who have lost their little ones, whether it was through childbirth or during infancy, asking, did we really do something wrong here? Was this something that was really in our control? And then what's the evidence for or against it? And then asking, am I bashing this guilt-based thought or fact or feeling? Next one is, could my guilt-based thought be an exaggeration of what's true? And the last one is, might other people have a different interpretation of the situation? And that can be helpful, but especially the last one. Could other people have a different interpretation of the situation? So it gives them a space to recognize that their perception isn't the only one that's present, isn't the only one that they can explore. There are other perceptions that can be explored as well. And again, the name of the book is Taming the Taming the Anxious Mind by Dr. Heidi Pan. Taming the Anxious Mind. And so kind of going along with what she said, part of it is about normalizing our client's experience, normalizing that grief pops up sometimes after loss, and guilt pops up along with that grief as well. And letting them know that you're not the only one that sometimes feels guilty. But let's explore this a little bit more. Is this really rational? Or maybe this is irrational that's happening. And then another thing is apology letters. Sometimes those can be very helpful and powerful to clients, being able to apologize to their loved one. That's worked really well with a couple of my teens whose last conversation wasn't the healthiest. And so they wrote apology letters. And we were able to talk about, before this conversation, you guys had a really good relationship. It was just that one moment. It was an unhealthy interaction. And in goodbye letters, they can say those things. I'm glad we had that long lasting good friendship. I'm sorry for that last conversation we had. And so goodbye letters can be helpful as well. Letters from the deceased. So this one is very key on knowing who died. So let's say, for example, a client comes in and they're feeling really guilty about something they did or something they said. And we find out that the person who died was abusive towards them. We would not have them do a letter from the deceased. If the person who died was someone who was a supportive, a healthy person, a supportive person, encouraging person, understanding person, then we could have them do the letter from the deceased. And usually in this letter, at some point, the deceased would say, I want you to live your life. I want you to be happy. I want you to forgive yourself. And so the person is writing this down. And this could be for homework, or it can happen right there in session. It all depends on you and your clients and what you guys prefer to do. And next one is honor the person. This is a very impactful one. We alluded a little bit to this before, ways to honor the person. So some people might do it through how they live their life. Some people might do it through a gesture. So they might donate to a hospital that the loved one really might have volunteered for, or they might find I know there's a couple that I used to work with. When their daughter died, they had a bench in a park dedicated to their daughter. So their daughter continued to live on. Her name continued to live on. So that's how they honored their daughter. Another one is responsibility pie chart. So this is a fun one that I enjoy doing. As strange as that might sound, but it is a fun one I enjoy doing with my clients, because just the immediate transition, it's so powerful and so impacting to see. So a client comes in, and again, I work with a lot of moms who's lost little ones. And so many times they feel responsible, and they put 100% of the responsibility of their child dying on themselves. And so I have them do a pie chart. Even if that is the case, I still have them do a pie chart. And I have them first list, who do you feel, or what do you feel, who or what is responsible for your child's death. And so I try to stay away from the word fault, and try to focus on responsible. And so I have them identify who's responsible. And maybe they say, I'm responsible, and the nurse is responsible. And so I then have them do the actual pie. So you have a pie, and you have to cut into pieces of who's responsible, of how much percentage. And so maybe they'll say, I am 95% responsible, and the nurse is 5% responsible. And so our goal is not to get rid of the guilt, not to get rid of the 95% they gave us. The goal is to decrease it. In each session, our goal is to decrease it a little bit more, and decrease it a little bit more, and decrease it a little bit more. And so that first session, we'll explore, okay, help you understand why you feel you're 95% responsible. And they'll list some reasons. And then help me understand why you feel the nurses were 5% responsible. And they'll list some reasons. And then we'll pause for a second and say, I'm wondering if there are other maybe people or entities or just experiences that might be partially responsible for this as well. And at first, it might be a challenge for them to identify. So this is where we give them ideas, and asking, well, maybe I'm wondering if the traffic had anything to do with it. If traffic wasn't there, would you have gotten to the hospital quicker? Like, oh yeah, there was a few red lights we ran. We got stuck behind. So possibly traffic. And then just keep listing those different possibilities. Even asking about the traffic. Did someone cut you off at some point? Yeah, someone did cut us off. Had someone on brakes. Okay, that was a few seconds cut off from us getting to the hospital on time. So maybe that played a role in it as well. So it's about us, again, finding other factors that played a role in the loss that may have happened. And then we do the pie chart again. And so at this time, maybe they say, okay, I am 80% responsible, and traffic plays 10% in it, and the nurse plays 10% in it as well. So what we did is we reduced it from 95 to now 80. And again, the goal is not to get rid of the guilt, is to decrease it as sessions go on. And so as time goes on, we might think of other factors that played a role in the loss of her child. And so again, that's the responsibility pie chart. Another variation of that is, instead of drawing an actual pie or pizza pie, people can do percentages. Some people enjoy numbers, for those who might be intellectual oriented, and they might choose to do numbers. So letting them do percentages versus actually drawing out pieces of the pie can be helpful as well. The next one is talking to a neutral person. Many times when an individual feels guilty, they feel like they can't talk to their family. They can't talk to their friends because their family and friends are quote unquote on their side. And so their family and friends are always going to say, don't feel guilty, don't feel bad, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. And so sometimes they want to talk to someone who's neutral. And that's when we as supporters can step in and be that listening ear, or helping them find someone who's neutral in their life outside of session as well. The next one is identifying positive connections with the person. So it goes back to what Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had talked about in her book about how sometimes when an individual is feeling guilty, there's a deeper underlining reason for it. And so sometimes it could be the person feels that they didn't have a healthy relationship or a healthy connection, or they feel that if I let go of my person, if I don't have guilt for my person, then that means I didn't truly love them. That means I might forget about them. That means I didn't really care about them. And so helping our clients identify, what are these deeper fears that you might have? What would life look like if you didn't have guilt? What would replace the guilt? And one of the things that we can do is helping them identify those positive connections. If they say, well, I feel that if I don't feel guilty, then I might forget them. Or if I feel guilty, then that means I didn't really love them. And then we pause for a minute and have them revisit, well, what are those positive things that happened between you guys? And the more we talk about those positive connections they had, many times their grief, their guilt will end up decreasing as well. And because they're able to realize, oh, wait, I did have some really good moments. Wow, I really did have a lot of love for them. And I can sit in that love. I can sit in that connection with them and bring acknowledgement to them. I don't have to sit in the guilt to bring acknowledgement. I can sit in the love. I can sit in the connections that I had with them, instead of sitting in that guilt, and still remember them, still feel loved for them. And the last one are visualizations. There are many different types of guided imageries and guided meditations of letting go of the guilt that clients can embrace. I definitely encourage you, if you do decide to refer a meditation, I encourage you to listen to it first, to make sure that it's something that is going to be beneficial for your clients. And then I would have your client to listen to the middle of that meditation just for a brief moment, so they hear the person's voice, because some voices can be triggering for some clients. So it's important that we're mindful of that. There's one woman, like I had mentioned before, I specialize in trauma. And so I had one woman, her abuser, her ex-husband was her abuser. And every time she heard a deep voice, she had a panic attack. And thankfully, we were able to get to a place where she didn't have panic attacks after hearing a deep voice. She was actually able to talk to people with a deep voice. It took many years to get to that place. But if she's doing a meditation and she hears a deep voice, it might cause her to get triggered and thinking about her abuser. So just be mindful of that, and definitely encourage our clients to listen to the middle section of the meditation so they have an idea of the voice that they're about to hear. All right, and the next one I'm going to talk about is lost timeline. Lost timeline can be very helpful, especially for clients who've experienced multiple losses, and for clients who feel that they are stuck and they're not going to be able to work through the grieving process. And so what we do is we have them draw a horizontal line. And on the top part of the horizontal line, we have those high points, those points where they felt accomplished, those points where they felt good about themselves, those points where they did well with something in life. And then we have them put the sad experiences, the traumatic experiences, life-changing moments in a negative way at the bottom part of this. And so this is an example of one. I changed a couple of things that I did with a client, but this person was born in 1988, and at the top part, they one of the first memories is playing outside of their family. Later on, they attended college, started a business, and bought a house. Down at the bottom, they were bullied in school, and their girlfriend cheated on them when they were in college, 20 years old, and they had a car crash. Now, in this car crash, it ended up being their fault because they were drinking at the time. And it resulted in them, actually, it was a motorcycle accident that this particular client had gotten into. This client was more of a daredevil. That was kind of his personality. And he was drinking at the time, got into a motorcycle accident, and it ended up causing him to become unable to move in his legs. And so he had to be in a wheelchair the rest of his life. And a few years later, when he was 29, his best friend died. And his best friend died due to suicide. And so when I met him, he was beginning to slowly recuperate his life, but still grieving his physical ability, the freedom that was taken away from him from that motorcycle accident, and the death of his friend as well. He felt that he was partially responsible because his friend had been there for him when he had gone through that motorcycle accident, but he felt that he had been so consumed with starting his business, which he did at 27 years old, starting a business, that he didn't check in on his friend enough. And so he had guilt that maybe if he had checked in on his friend more often, then maybe his friend would have committed suicide. And so by us doing this timeline, it helped me to understand what my client was experiencing and why he felt so much guilt. And so another benefit to doing lost timelines, and there's different names, some people might call it a life timeline, but the benefit of doing these timelines is it also helps our clients be able to recognize those places where they have been able to accomplish some things. So it shows the resiliency. After his crash, he started a business. After a crash, activities of his limbs were gone. He could not walk. He started his own business, and it's a very successful business to this day. And so that resiliency, losing your girlfriend cheating on you and still starting a business, being bullied, but still going to college. So being able to show those resiliency moments can be very powerful and impacting to our clients, and letting them know, hey, you've been through tough times before. Let's see how we can work together to get through this tough time as well. And that, again, can be very empowering to them. And another benefit of this is kind of going back to mass grief. Again, mass grief is when a person experiences a loss and they push down those emotions, and it comes out in the form of a physical ailment. Sometimes when we're working with our clients, it's hard for us to figure out what's really going on with them because we don't have the whole picture. So sometimes doing these lost timelines or life timelines can be helpful because we can see, oh, I see your physical ailment started about a year after you lost your mom. It happened a year after you got fired from work. I'm wondering if those are related to each other. So doing these lost timelines can give us a more holistic picture of what their life has really been like as well. All right, and we're gonna do one more, and then we're gonna see if there's any questions, because I know I've talked quite a bit. And so if you guys have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat and I'll get to them after this last slide. So containment is another one that can be very helpful for a lot of clients. So basically what we do is we have our clients imagine a container. It can be any size, it can be any shape, any color. It's purely up to them. And so in this container, we place all the distressful emotions and thoughts that they might have into this container. And we lock up this container and we keep this container locked until they are ready to explore it. And sometimes when they come to session, we might open up this container, we might pull out a few things. And then when session is over, we might put a few of those things back in, or at least some things here in session, and we close it up and we let them go on about their life. And maybe when they're at home, maybe they say, you know what, I have capacity to explore what's in this container. So they go back to the container, they open it up, pull out some things, and then they say, yep, I feel like I've done all that I can do right now. I'm at max capacity. Let me put this back in the container, and then close it up. And so what that does, it's just a way of being able to go about life a little bit more smoother, knowing that I've put everything in this container. So some people might put it into a closet. Some people might put it behind a closed door that's locked. Some people might think of a chest as well. Another way of looking at it, especially for those who might work with children, another way of looking at it is a backpack. So we all have a backpack that we're carrying. And in this backpack, we have bricks that we have put in it because maybe we have homework that we have to do. So that's a brick. Maybe we have chores. That's a brick. Maybe we have stresses with friendships. That's a brick. We lost our dad. That's a brick. We are uncertain of our future now that dad's gone. And we now have to take care of mom. Those are additional bricks. And so when we come to therapy, what we do is we take our backpack off. We unzip the backpack and we take a look at the different bricks that we're carrying. And we decide which brick do you want to look at today? Do you want to look at friendships? Do we want to look at dad not being here? Do you want to look at the fact that we're now taking care of mom and taking care of the responsibilities of the house? And so we just decide which brick we want to look at the day. And when we're done for the day, we decide which bricks do we want to put back in the backpack? Or maybe we want to break one of those bricks in half and leave a half of the brick here in the therapy session, and then take the other half of the brick home. And so that's just a way of looking at it. And this can also be very helpful for parents as well. And sometimes parents don't realize just how much weight is on our child's shoulder. So doing this particular activity with parents, we can have our parents list, what are the bricks in your backpack? And then we say, now imagine that exact same backpack with those exact same bricks on your child's body. And then many times the light bulbs will go off when we're sharing that with the parent, because they realize, wow, this is heavy for me. Their body is so much smaller than mine. I can't imagine how much more heavy it is for my child to experience these same things. And so sometimes that can be helpful, especially for parents who might put a lot of responsibilities on the children's shoulders. That can be very helpful for them to kind of see it that way, as we're all carrying a backpack around and how many bricks are in our backpack. It can be very helpful. And so we're going to pause just for a moment just to see if there are any questions. So I'm going to pull up the chat real quick. So one question is, if client blames themselves on the death of their on and off again parent who was in addiction, and they're in addiction as well, how would you comfort them and the deceased was their abuser? I think I'm following you. So I'm hearing the client has a parent who wasn't an addict, a substance abuser, and your client themselves is a substance abuser, I'm hearing. And their parent is no longer here. The partner is no longer here. Okay, got it. All right. So the partner was an abuser and into substance abuse. They were in substance abuse and the partner has died now. And so you're wondering how to give them comfort and support. Yes. And so it's about going back to the beginning, asking them, how are you doing? Where are you at right now in your grieving process? And so it's different for everyone. Maybe this individual might find life to be more stressful without their partner because maybe they're the sole breadwinner. So sitting with them in that. Maybe their client sees it as a relief. They are no longer being in an abusive relationship. So they might see it as a relief. They might feel lost. Maybe their abuser guided them in a lot of different directions. So they might feel lost and unsure where to go in life. So again, it's about meeting our client where they are. And some of the tools that we're talking about can be very helpful, especially if our clients, again, I don't know too much about the clients, so I can't give too many specific details about it. But sometimes when individuals experience abuse, many times they have an attachment disorder as well. So that might be something to explore with them, their attachment disorder. And how does that impact your connection with your loved one? And we are going to talk a little bit about another tool, another intervention that might be helpful, is asking our clients, what are the things from this relationship that you want to take into your future? Or what are the things in this relationship that you don't want to take into your future? So sometimes when someone experiences abuse, sometimes they themselves might demonstrate some abusive tendencies as well. Again, not the case for everyone, but sometimes that does happen. And so sometimes they might be abusive towards themselves. Maybe their abuser said a lot of hurtful and verbal abuse towards themselves. So they'll be verbally abusive towards themselves. And we can ask that question, what are the things that you don't want to take with you in the future? And maybe they're able to identify, I don't want to take this verbal abuse with me in the future. So it kind of goes back to that narrative therapy that we talked about, the anticipated trajectory, where we are right now, and the future, the next anticipated trajectory that we're going to try to create with them. So again, it's about meeting them where they're at. I'm not sure which particular place that this person is in right now. Of course, I would not encourage doing any of the things I just shared if they're in the acute. During acute, it's not about processing grief. It's about sitting with those emotions and regulating those emotions. And when they're able to regulate those emotions, then we go into processing, which are the skills that we're talking about right now. But great question. Any other questions? I'm going to try to scroll through to see if there were any other questions. It looks like there aren't any other questions. So we're going to take let me make sure we're good on time. Yes, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we are going to end the rest of the training discussing some more interventions and creating a support system, the value of creating a support system. And so... All right, so we're in the last section of our training for today. And so, next thing I want to talk about is the ball in a box analogy. And so, as I'm talking about these analogies, I know a couple people had asked about group work. Analogies and metaphors can be very helpful when it comes to group work. And so, this particular one is ball in a box analogy. So there's two versions of it. And so while I'm going through this, I want you to think about which version you've heard. And yeah, we'll just dive into it. So the concept is the ball that you see is considered grief. And that red button is the pain button. Those are the triggers that might happen. And when the ball hits that red button, there's a lot of pain. And the box is our life. And so one version says that as time goes on, the box gets bigger and bigger. The grief stays the same size, but the box gets bigger and bigger, resulting in it taking a lot more for the ball of grief to hit the pain button. Others say that the ball of grief gets smaller and it shrinks, resulting in, as time goes on, the ball doesn't hit the pain button as often. And so I encourage you guys to ask your clients if they've heard of this, and if so, which version have they heard of? The original version was that the box gets bigger. So in other words, life is to expand. We are to have new experiences in life, meet new people, go to new places. And because our life expands, grief, it takes a lot more for grief to hit the red button, the trigger button. But again, it's just it's important to be aware of the two versions that are out there and to be aware of which version our client may have heard. The next one to talk about is, again, different perspectives when it comes to grief. So for those of you who might do family work, there's family sculpting. And so basically what it is we start a session and we ask the family who would like to be the sculptor? And so the sculptor's responsibility is to place family members into whatever position they envision them to be. And I'll give an example here in just a moment. So go through the different roles. And so they place the family into whatever position from their perception of how life looks. And then the therapist, before they do that, the therapist might ask the question, how did life look before the loss? Or how does life look now that the loss has happened? Or how do you want life to look since the loss? And then once the person puts the individual and the family members into their positions, that's when the therapist begins to ask questions to get a better understanding of what's going on in this person's mind and their thoughts and their feelings about whatever's happening. And then we also explore the family members and their thoughts about, well, what is it like to be in this position? So let's actually give a concrete example to kind of get a better understanding of family sculpting. So let's say there's a family of 4. We have a mom, dad, and 2 siblings. So the therapist asks, who would like to be the sculptor today? And so if both children or 2 people say, I want to be the sculptor, usually there's a lead sculptor and the other one is more of the assistant. But in this scenario, the youngest says, you know what, I want to be the sculptor. The youngest is, let's say, 8 years old. And the sister is, let's say, 12 years old. And so the 8-year-old, we asked the 8-year-old, okay, so for today, I want you to put your family in the position of where you think your family is since your grandma has died. And so maybe he puts mom in a fetal position, dad standing over mom, about to hit mom, and sister is over in the corner. And we sit with the little one and ask, all right, so help me understand what's going on here. And you've been working with the family for a while and haven't heard anything about abuse, but yet that's what we're witnessing right now is dad about to hit mom and mom's in fetal position. And so we ask the 8-year-old, hey, tell us about this scenario and what's going on in this. And so the child's perspective is that mom is, because mom, it's mom's mom who died, so maternal grandmother. Because mom's mom is dead, mom is always crying in bed. And dad is angry at mom, and I think they might be getting a divorce. And sister, she's always on her own. She never comes out of her room anymore. That's kind of what life looks like for me. And so we ask about how does it make you feel? The thoughts that you want to share. And then we ask each of the individuals, what is it like for you, mom, to be in the fetal position? What's it like for you, dad, about to strike mom? What's it like for you to be in this corner? And so again, what this does, it helps bring a more holistic perspective of what's happening in the home. It helps gives us insight and the family insight on how people are interpreting different actions and different words and different events that are happening. And so the reality of the situation, what's actually going on is grandma was an active member in the home, and she helped run a lot of things in the home because both parents full-time jobs. And so grandma was kind of the caretaker mainly. And so now that grandma's no longer here, mom went into depression. And so she stays in bed. So every time her son goes into the bedroom, mom is always in fetal position. So that's where that fetal position comes from. And then dad, because he now not only still works his full-time job, but now he has to hurry up, call out of work sometimes, pick up the children, bring them home after their activities, fix dinner because mom's in bed and she's feeling depressed because her mom's died. So now dad has a lot on his plate. So he's easily agitated. And sometimes he'll make comments about how frustrated he is with mom. And the little boy takes that as dad hates mom. They're going to get a divorce. And that's how it is sometimes. Sometimes children hear something and they kind of run with it, and their mind and their imagination goes in a completely different direction than what's really happening. In reality, mom and dad aren't on the verge of getting divorced. It never even crossed either of their minds. It's just dad's a little bit stressed right now because he has a lot more on his plate. And sister, she's kind of in her own role, being a teenager, and also missing grandma. Causes her to be even more shut off from the family. So that's the reality of what's happening in the actual family. And so when family sculpting happens, a lot of intense emotions can pop up. So we as therapists, all we do is explore. We have them share their thoughts, share their feelings. If we see a family member crying or becoming emotional, then we pause for a moment and ask them, what's going on with you? I can see you're having an emotional reaction right now. Help us understand what's happening with you emotionally or mentally right now. Help us understand some of the thoughts that you're having right now. And then once we've gone through and processed with the family, everyone's thoughts and feelings about what's going on in this particular sculpting activity, we then de-roll everyone. And so what we do is we then talk about, well, what are some coping skills that you can do? What does your week look like as mom, as dad, as sibling? What are some things that you're planning on doing as a family? And so it's about helping them to come out of those roles in that moment. So again, that's family sculpting, can be very helpful, especially if you do some family work together. And then the next thing, well, one more thing when it comes to family sculpting. So there was a family that I was working with several years ago. Many times when it comes to family work, many times there's an identified quote unquote problem person. And so when we're doing family work, it's important that we, as clinicians, move away from this is the problem person to the family is my client, not this one person, and figure out what's wrong with this one person. It's the family is my client. As figuring out the dynamics of them interacting with each other and why sometimes we're having certain reactions within the family. So kind of keeping that in mind, even after experiencing grief, sometimes you can come in saying, my son is having more tantrums at home. He's the problem. We need to do family work. Instead, focusing on, I hear what you're saying. You're coming in because of your son, but let's look at family as a whole. How can we as a unit come together versus let me just do therapy with the child? So that's important to keep in mind as well for those who might do family work. The next one is creating your own metaphors for grief. And so kind of going back to the book that I had mentioned earlier, Counseling and Therapy Skills by David Martin, he does a really great example of metaphoric language and the value of metaphoric language. So he says here, a client of mine recently suffered a personal tragedy and was very worried that she was withdrawing from other people and felt unable to do as much as she felt she should be doing. She had previously talked about the part of her life that was like a tiger in her strength and commitment to what she felt was right. In the context of our talking, I commented, quote unquote, right now, you seem to be like a wounded tiger. You've retreated to hide in your cave and lick your wounds. She later told me that this metaphor captured her experience at many levels and strongly resonated with how she felt in the way that helped her put her words and feelings that she barely even knew or understood. She was still a tiger, not a weakling, and it was natural and right that she retreated for a while. And so it's important that we hear the metaphors and analogies that our clients use and take it and run with it. Kind of going back to her example, she realized, oh, wait, I'm not a weakling. I am a tiger. Just at this present moment, I need to retreat because I'm hurting, because I'm experiencing pain, I'm experiencing some sadness and a loss. So that's an example of how beneficial it can be. There are so many different metaphors and analogies out there. So I definitely encourage you guys to embrace them, especially if you're doing group work, letting our clients in the group identify a metaphor or an analogy that works well for them and then sharing it with the group. That can be powerful as well. So another example I have up here is a broken glass. Sometimes clients feel that whenever they experience a tragic moment, it's as if their life has been shattered like a broken glass and there's millions of pieces everywhere. And they're trying to figure out, how do I pick up these pieces? What do I even do with all these pieces? And so using that same metaphor, that same language that they're using, we can encourage them, you know what? The particular sculpting that it was before, when we pick up these pieces, it may not be exactly how it was, but once we get these pieces together and put them together, figure out what pieces we want to keep, what pieces we don't want to keep, when we put these pieces back together, we can still create something just as beautiful, just as magnificent, just as purposeful as the other. It may not be the same, but it's still something just as impacting. And same thing with a tornado. Sometimes clients come in, especially clients that I work with who experience trauma, many times they come and say, it feels like my world's like a tornado. Like a tornado just came through and just destroyed everything. I don't even know where to begin. I just feel like my life is in shambles right now. And so it's about, again, using that same metaphor, the same language, and normalizing. I hear what you're saying. Most people in this situation would feel like a tornado's come through their life. What's one little piece in this whole thing of tornado can we pick up today? Just one thing that we can pick up today. And helping them pick up little pieces at a time and figure out what pieces we don't want to keep and what pieces we do want to keep after the tornado. And the last one on this particular slide is love after loss illustration. And that's what this heart is, this particular picture that was scanned in. So many years ago, I used to work with, solely work with children. Now I work primarily with adults. But this is a particular one that I did with the little one that I was working with, and her mom had died. And so if you notice closely, you'll see an initial red heart. That was an initial heart that we started out with when we first did this activity together. And so what we did was we put all the people who she loved into her heart in this picture. And so she has mom, she has her big brother, music, her dad, granddad, friends, grandparents, and food. And then as time went on, what we did is we began to add to the heart. And you can see that things being added to the heart. So she added another friend, she added an uncle, she added her pet dog. And so as time went on, she began to add more, and this heart began to expand and expand. And so this particular client that I was working with, the dad had ended up dating another woman. And so that's where she began to have maladaptive behaviors at school. And that's when dad said, yep, we need to go to therapy. And that's when I met her. And so by doing this activity, it helped her to realize that even if dad does add this new person to our family, even if this person does come in, it doesn't take away mom's spot. Mom will always have this spot. All we'll do is just simply add another section when we're ready. If we ever get ready, we'll add another section for dad's partner, which should be stepmom, whenever we are ready. And so by doing this for children can be very helpful for them to realize that just because mom, just because dad, just because sister, just because friend is gone, it does not mean they lose their spot in our heart. That can be very helpful for children to hear and to understand as well. And also doing this activity with parents. Once we share it once we do this activity with our children, then having a parent session or a family session and sharing, this is where our little one is at right now, and having the child share this with their parent. This is my heart, and mom's always going to have this space no matter what. And giving dad space to say, yeah, I agree. Mom's going to always have a space in my heart. And sometimes having those heart-to-heart conversations helps children to realize, wow, I'm not the only one that's going to keep mom in their heart, even though this additional person is joining our family. And so the next thing is journaling. Journaling can be very helpful and supportive in a lot of different ways. There are many different types of journaling. This is another great one to do with groups, for those of you who might do group work. So there's thankfulness journaling. There's a book called The How of Happiness. And in the book that talks about how 60% of our happiness is out of our control. So it's based on genetics. It's based on the environment that we're raised in. It's based on what we witnessed growing up. It's based on our personality. But 40% of our level of happiness is based on what we do as an individual. And so one of the things we talk about is this concept of thankfulness, embracing those things that you are thankful for. Another thing to talk about is volunteering. Volunteering is another way of promoting happiness, because we are removing ourselves from our own ailments, our own challenges, and we are focusing on another individual. So thankfulness is a type of journaling that people can do. And then another one is future or goal-oriented journaling. So it's talking about, how do I want my future to look? What are some goals or some targets that I want to reach in my life? The next one is processing. And this is what most people think of when they hear journaling. They think of processing. This is what happened today. This is how I felt. This is what I thought. This is what I did. And sometimes it's helpful to let people know, hey, there's more types of journaling, not just processing. And then the last one is accomplishments. So this is mainly geared towards maybe individuals who have experienced a loss and their self-esteem is impacted. Having them write down those accomplishments for their day. I was able to get out of bed and take a shower, and I was able to eat lunch today. That could be their accomplishments. And when they come in with their journal, sharing their accomplishments, it's important that we give them a lot of praise, that positive reinforcement to them. And then, or things that they like about themselves. Many times it's hard for people to identify something that they like about themselves. Just for a moment, I want you to ask yourself, what are 3 things that you like about yourself? Now, was that easy for you to think of those 3 things? Or maybe it was hard for you. Maybe you haven't even thought of the 3 things yet. Maybe you're still stuck on number 1 or number 2. And so that happens to a lot of people. We don't think about what are the things that I like about myself. And so sometimes doing some journaling about that can be helpful. There are a lot of things. You can simply Google this. I have a couple of different lists that I utilize, but you can Google positive traits, positive self traits. And usually a list will pop up, and you can print that off and give it to our clients and have them circle what are the things that you like about yourself. And I have them list or circle the ones that they identify. And then I have them pick out the top 3 that they identify with the most. And then I have them give concrete examples. What are examples of you being empathetic? What are examples of you being kind? What are examples of you being thoughtful? And that can really help a long way when it comes to people who have experienced a loss and they're not questioning their confidence. They're not questioning their identity. It can help them to reconnect themselves to their identity as well. Another type is directed journaling. So this is more about us as clinicians and us as supporters, giving them something concrete to write about. So these are example questions. One could be, what kind of things did the person that's died teach you about life? Have them write a paragraph or a sentence, and it could be in session, or it could be something that is done outside of session as well for homework. Next one is, how did they manage challenging times, and what lessons can you take from those experiences? This can be really helpful, especially for clients who might be stuck in the grieving process, and maybe they might be experiencing guilt about the loved one as well. This can be helpful because it helps them to think about their loved one and how they went through challenging moments, tough moments, and they can draw from that. Say, you know what, they did have this quality, they did have this tenacity, they did have this determination. I can embrace those as well in my life to help their legacy live on. The next one is, what are some strengths do they see in you? Sometimes our clients can get so caught up in, I don't do this right, I didn't do that right. But sometimes it can be helpful for them to pause for a moment and ask your loved one who died, what are some things that they saw in you that they thought was strong or great about you? And that also helps build connection as well. Many times you're able to pause and think of a story, think of a scenario that happened of, yeah, one day we were walking and this happened and that happened. They told me that they were proud of me. So it helps them to also remember their loved one in a positive light as well. The next one is, the difference might it make to keep their memories alive? That can be a powerful one as well. And then, what do you do? What do you want to be, even though they aren't physically here? And then another one is a chart and chain analysis. This is also a DBT skill as well. A couple of therapeutic orientations utilize chain analysis. But DBT definitely does chain analysis. And so this kind of goes back to those moments where maybe an individual is triggered and maybe they engage in maladaptive behaviors after being triggered. And so what we do is we pause for moments and we have them do step by step of what happened that day. How did you feel that morning? What did you do that morning? What did you do when you walked into work? What happened that triggered this reaction? What did you do after you had that reaction? What did you do after that? How did you feel after that? And so what we do is, once we've actually done a chain analysis, actually written down how things transpired throughout their day leading up to that moment and what happened after that moment, we then ask, what is something that we could have done differently before this trigger? So maybe they woke up and they were feeling sad that morning, and that sadness carried over with them. So what is something that we could have done that morning to change that sad feeling, or to decrease that sad feeling? What is a coping skill we could have done? Going back to that list that we created during the first session or during that first group session. What is the coping skill that we can utilize, that we could have utilized? So it's just about finding different avenues that we could have done differently that day that led up to being triggered. And so once we were triggered, what is something we could have done differently? And then afterwards, what is something we could have done to help regulate that emotion as well? The next one is assessing self-talk. Assessing self-talk can be very powerful. Sometimes our clients could be seeing a lot of negative things about themselves, especially if guilt is associated or if they had an abuser who's died, whether it was a parent, a caretaker, a loved one, such as a spouse or a sibling. Sometimes they can take on that language and say some negative self-talk to themselves. Or if they feel, like I had mentioned, guilty. Maybe if I had told them to go to the doctor, then they would still be alive. I'm a bad person. I'm a thoughtless person. I am selfish. So a lot of negative self-talk can pop up. And so it's important for us to assess and to ask ourselves, well, what are you, when that happened, what does that say about yourself? Or how do you feel about yourself? Or what are some things you might say about who you are? And so that helps us to kind of get a better idea. And it's about helping our clients switch, move from negative self-talk to positive self-talk. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that. One way is doing the opposite. So let's say the person says, well, I am worthless because I didn't tell them to go to the hospital enough. I didn't call them and remind them that they need to go to the hospital. So I'm a worthless person. And so we have them to say the opposite. You are a worthwhile person. You are a person of value. And then other people, they might do examples. So let's say the same scenario. I didn't call them enough and remind them to go to the hospital. Now they're no longer here. And it's my fault. I'm worthless. We then have them list 3 examples showing that they do bring value to the world. So maybe they bring value within their own family in some capacity. Maybe they bring value within their work field, the positions they have at their job. Maybe they bring value in, maybe they volunteer in their community. So they bring value in that aspect. So we have them list 3 concrete examples showing that they do bring value. And again, that's just an example. There's so many other negative self-talk that our clients can engage in. So again, it's about being mindful of that. Next one is the grief monitoring diary. This has been very helpful in a lot of situations. So several years ago, almost eight years ago, there was a gentleman I was working with. He was in his 20s, and he had lost his fiance. She was unfortunately murdered. She was mistaken to be somebody else, and they ended up murdering her. And at the time, they had a 3-month-old. And so he went from having a 3-month-old engaged to his fiance to now being a single father. And he was having a lot of physical ailments. He was calling out of work a lot because of his stomach. He was having a lot of stomach pain. And so he went to his primary care doctor. The doctors could not figure out what was going on. They ran test after test. They couldn't figure out what was going on. And so that's when the primary care doctor referred him to my office. And I started meeting with him. And when we first met, I did the loss timeline to kind of figure out, okay, there's something that triggered these ailments. So let's go ahead and figure out kind of what does your life look like? What experiences have you had? And that's when I actually learned about his fiance who was murdered. And so come to find out, he never had the opportunity to grieve. So he was experiencing multiple types of grief. Not only was he experiencing mass grief because physical ailments, but not knowing it was related to grief, but disenfranchised grief. So he went from having a fiance, a partner, and a child to now being sole breadwinner, sole caretaker. And he had a lot of responsibilities on his shoulders, a lot of additional responsibilities. So he didn't even have time to grieve and mourn his fiance's death. And so, and at the time he wasn't living near family. So this is a 20-year-old single parent with no family around. And so he had absolutely no opportunity whatsoever to mourn and grieve his fiance's death. And so through the timeline, I was able to notice that. And I asked, how have you been doing as far as grieving your fiance's death. And he kind of paused for a second. It was like, you know what? I haven't even cried about it. You know, I cried at the funeral, but since then I've just been on the go because I mean, I have a little girl to take care of. And I have work and there's no way I can possibly think and pause for a second and cry. And so we began talking a little bit more about coping skills. And we began to do a grief monitoring diary to figure out what is going on with this trigger. Something's triggering him to have stomach pains. And so we had him first identify when was it happening. So we noticed it was happening on certain days, not every day of the week, but certain days of the week. And we began to kind of narrow things down a little bit more as sessions went on. And we began to realize through his diary that it was happening when he was doing the dishes. So something about doing the dishes that caused him to later on that day have a stomach pain. When he did the dishes at nighttime, he was fine. But when he did the dishes in the morning time, that stomach pain would come up about lunchtime, and then usually about 3:30, 2:30, 3:30-ish, it'd be so intense, he would have to call out the rest of the day. And so we were able to realize through meditation and being more mindful. So this whole time we're building his coping skills up, and we're embracing mindfulness and being in the present moment, the here and now, because again, mindfulness reveals what's happening. And so he began to realize that when he was doing the dishes, sometimes he would kind of zone off. And when he was zoning off, he noticed one day that he was looking at her car. Her car was parked outside of the house, and he could see it through the window where he did the dishes. And so, come to find out, what was happening was that was his way of grieving. Come to find out, the story behind the car was that she had never owned a car before. She grew up in a more of a poor environment, so she had never had the opportunity to own a car. And so she worked many long hours to save up to buy this car. And this is her first car, so she's really proud of it. And it was her prized possession. And he didn't want to let that go. He wanted to keep her car because it reminded him of her. And what was happening is while he was doing the dishes, he was looking at the car. It was causing him to feel pain on the inside. But because of responsibilities, he would finish the dishes, go out about his day. And then as time went on, that physical pain in his stomach would increase and increase and increase, resulting in him now calling out of work. And so when we realized what was happening, we were then able to find space. Going back to the dual processing, the back and forth, finding a designated time to mourn, to grieve. We were able to embrace that particular model, and it allowed him to find space to grieve her death. And as time went on, he would see the car and he wouldn't have stomach pains the rest of the day. And of course, it took many sessions to get to that place. But that's the benefit of doing the grief monitoring diary. It gives us insight on what's going on with our clients when they're unable to recognize what's happening. And so another benefit of doing the grief monitoring diary is it also helps us to recognize progress. So there's some clients that I've done this with. When we first started doing it, they were crying every single day for 45 minutes, for 3 hours, off and on for 3 hours. They were having nightmares. And then as time went on, because we're doing the grief monitoring diary, we were able to notice that it was decreasing as we were doing our coping skills, as we were doing talking in session, as we were doing art therapy or play therapy. We began to notice that it was decreasing. And it got to the point where they had intrusive thoughts maybe once a week at nighttime, just before bed. They maybe cried themselves to sleep once that week. They didn't have any nightmares that week. And so that's, again, another benefit of doing it is that you're able to see the progress that people are making.